Have you ever seen 23 people in this room? Yeah. That's those are your colleagues who are spending 25 grand a year for education, not even showing up to class or whatever it is. Usually people, what's the saying? You come out with 100 grand in debt or something like that if you had to pay full boat for college. I don't know what the number is this week. Which I get. I mean, this is just business. Your faculty have to get paid and all this stuff. So education's expensive, but there's two expectations. One, you're getting good education, so that's from our side being delivered. And then secondarily, if you're spending money on something, you might as well use it. Otherwise, you shouldn't have asked for it for Christmas. Go get your free drinks at uh, uh, I understand Starbucks actually has a really good arrangement. I think you can go to college for free if you work at Starbucks.
Yep.
Yeah, there's I learned that from you. Your girlfriend works at a Starbucks. Is that it? Yeah. So I mean, that's a good deal, and Starbucks is, that's not like a schleppy place. I've never heard people like unhappy. I'm guessing it's a decent place to work. I mean, you can always run into a crap manager or something, but I'm guessing that it's a little higher quality than if you work at Taco Bell. I don't think Taco Bell's paying for your college. All you can eat beans during your shift. You got a Taco Bell story?
They absolutely pay.
But for everyone, or like, what's the deal? Taco Bell pay for college?
And it's not a manager. They will pay for part of your
Or
college,
just part of it?
or they'll pay completely for online courses.
Okay, so they have an education deal. So that's how desperate they are for workers. They started off putting the signs outside the places saying, we're paying $19 an hour for you to make tacos. And then that wasn't working. So like, look, we'll pay for your college. And that's probably still not working.
It's not worth it.
They do that for certain majors. I don't think they do it for all majors.
No.
I think the exact same thing.
Right. All right. So let's start off with a Christian worldview question. So let's assume someone contacts me about wanting to pitch a research project to them, or they're looking for financing or something like that for a project. So you have a meeting set up. You look this person up online. You've bumped into a couple times. Everything seemed fine. Whatever. You look them up online. You find out that there's a little bit of a past. The person used to be a college professor. They were let go. They weren't. I think they were maybe an adjunct at a college, but they weren't rehired for that class. Um, I'm guessing they said something in the classroom or something. It couldn't be worse than some of the stuff I say. I can't imagine. But in any case, he said something in class, and wasn't rehired. Went to a lawyer to try to, wanted to like basically sue him or whatever. No lawyer would take his case. So he made some public comment about now he understands why people shoot up schools or something like that. Just a comment, made the comment, words only. So hold on. So, and I think he maybe made a couple of other comments similar along those lines.
Hypothetical, right?
Let's say maybe. So hold on. So then he goes to court trying to represent himself because the lawyer wouldn't take his case. Lawyer didn't take his case. He was upset, complained about it, said what he said, wanted to represent himself, was found not competent to represent himself. So he was suing the other place, but he was found not competent to represent himself and was actually put into like a mental health ward place for rehabilitation. So they got him on some good drugs or whatever. When he got out, he went off his meds. I think he said a few more things. I think there might have been a phone call too, where it was, yeah. So anyways, So then he went back to court to try to, and it was rejected again, but they didn't send him away. This time they just said he wasn't competent to represent himself. So, anyways, there might have been a couple other things in there, but then he comes to me and wants to meet up to talk about a project. I mean, he's got a physics background, engineering, everything kind of lines up. And so these things started in 2016, and the last time he was in court was 2022. So this is 4 years separated. What do? Do you meet with them? Do you ignore him? Tell him I can't? Do you just not respond? Do you respond and say I can't meet with you because you're a lunatic? Do you meet with him? What do you do? What do you think?
Say, hi, thank you for the opportunity, I appreciate it, but I would,
Okay, so you're on the don't meet with them.
yeah.
Okay, what do you think? Some computer science-y research stuff. I don't know. That's what we're meeting about.
Oh, you know, it's like.
Yeah, it's all I know. He wants to pitch a project. I have no idea if he just wants money from me or if he's looking for, hey, do you, we're running an internship because this is he owns his own company. But it's one of those things where I think he can't get hired anywhere. So, and he doesn't put his he doesn't go back very far for his employment record. So certainly you're not seeing this university on there where the issue is. But anyways, yeah, so I don't know the project. Go ahead.
More people that you find that don't say that's the reason why someone get shot up. I mean, it just doesn't seem like a really good idea to.
Okay, so you don't want to meet with them. What do you think?
I wouldn't meet with him.
You don't want to meet with them?
I would.
You will meet with them. Okay, why?
Like, maybe he changed.
Yeah,
I
we
still
don't.
have to give opportunities to people. Like,
Okay,
and
What do you think?
maybe he has a great idea too.
who knows? Yeah. What do you think?
I was gonna say, plus the worst thing you could do is just hear out what they say.
Yeah.
You like that idea a lot.
Well, yeah, but this guy threatens to shoot up schools.
Are you serious? He threatened to shoot up school?
Did you miss that part of this conversation?
I thought you said that
He said it.
Get shot up.
Oh yeah, but I think there was. I mean, I think he said a few other things after that. He didn't like say I'm going to shoot up a school.
Oh.
He kept saying things along the lines of now he understands why these things happen. Seemed to show some empathy for those who have participated in such events. Go ahead.
Meet with him. See what he has to say. If it's a good idea, you just steal it for yourself. A bad idea, and let go.
So meet with them so you can rob them blind. Okay.
Yeah, so
It's a twist.
You're gonna send him away, but now
Yeah.
you have a good idea.
What do you think?
I would say meet with him, not on campus.
Okay. Why not on campus? What's the big deal?
Like the school record, you know, I think it's.
You got a reputation.
Okay, so you wouldn't meet with them on campus, but you meet with them off campus. Okay. Well, why? Why are you okay meeting with them at all?
Well, it's like, I'm thinking, Kanye made graduation, and then he said some crazy stuff, and then he dropped Bully. Bully's pretty good,
Yeah.
so everybody's pretty evil.
And Kanye is the he's the one with all the parties, right?
No.
Which Diddy. Okay, gotcha. Kanye was the one that had like mental illness. The bipolar is okay. So we'll leave that out. This guy was diagnosed with the same thing, bipolar.
Kanye's the one that made the song called "Hail Hitler."
Oh, see, I don't listen to the music, but I may have heard that in the news. I mean, I got it. All right, so let me give you a hypothetical. Let's assume that you're this guy. You're this guy who's trying to pitch something. Would you want to never be able to escape your past? Would you want people to give you a shot moving forward? Or after a mistake that happened during a period of time where you went into places for mental illness, you would hope that you could put that part of your life behind you? Would you want to be locked out for the rest of your life because of a mistake? So if you put yourself in his shoes, you wouldn't want to be treated the way that most of you want to treat him. Or at least several of you want to treat them. Go ahead. Did you change your mind?
Well, no,
Now I'll meet him at a Taco Bell. I mean, what could go wrong?
that was my decision, right? I'd probably pray about it. Like, you're right, you never know if he's actually changed or not. But you also have the case where people constantly are out of the mental ward. You know, they think, oh, they just need a chance, they need someone to help them. And then you try to help them and then you get screwed over.
Okay. What if you knew there was a 70% chance you were going to get screwed over, but there was a 30% chance that this guy's he's legit and he just need a shot. Screw him over first, rob him blind, meet with him, but meet with him in like a a low key place. I mean, that guy all he gets out of there with is his pants. You got his wallet, you got his hat, you got his car keys.
Nothing.
But then you find out the guy took the bus. Nobody will give him a car loan. What do you think Jesus would do?
Doesn't he know the hearts of all?
Jesus would meet with him. Jesus would probably meet with him in his own living room. Give the guy a shot. How many times have we been forgiven for stuff we've done? And he still comes after us. Yeah.
Wise about it. You can't just be like open arms to every single person.
No, I get it that you could pass it through some sort of logic filter. And I get it. Let's say this guy was, like a known murderer where you're like, okay, I can't believe he's not still in prison. And somehow he has an open carry license or somebody, or at least claims it. I get it. You do have to put some level of standard to it. You don't just say, I'll meet with anyone. The guy from the Saw movies, meet him out at a farm somewhere. That's probably not happening. So isn't that an interesting?
Yeah.
No, not even close to hypothetical. Yeah, this was someone who wanted to come to campus to pitch something. Who has another partner who works as a software engineer somewhere. So they're pitching it together. They have some project they're working on. And they're looking to get involved with the AI lab. And maybe have, some students work on projects with them to get some experience or whatever. This guy's got at least a master's in engineering or physics or possibly a PhD. He's adjuncting for it. I'm sure he hasn't passed. Maybe there's a reason why he's a career adjunct. But does that mean he doesn't deserve a shot? What do you think?
Say you absolutely have to now that you've told us the story, because we need the conclusion of the story.
To find out if I make it out of there alive. We're gonna.
One upside if you die, we get that building.
What's this?
One upside is if you die, we get that building. Oh,
If I die, we get what building?
the building's being named after you.
Oh, the building here on campus. But that has to be I die and my wife dies. She's got a terminal cancer diagnosis, so you're rolling the dice on that. She was supposed to be dead almost 2 years ago.
We can make something happen.
Yeah, they gave her 2 years to live 3.5 years ago. At the very least, you won't have to wait long. So if I get hit in the parking lot by a series of cars backing up aggressively, that sounds oddly specific as well. What's up? Yeah, so once I kick the bucket and my wife kicks the bucket, computer science is going to get their own building. It'll be I'm still working on the name. I guess I better, if I got you guys for my jury, I better get that name picked out quick. Any moment could be my last. The lit who?
The lit done. Calls me really cool.
Oh, that is stupid. You come up with worse names than my wife does.
No. Look, remember the dungeon?
Dungeon.
Dungeon crawler?
The who?
41.
Oh, dungeon crawler. Oh, but nobody else is going to get that. I'm thinking you got to do like a whole mural of something like my shirts, like with me and Mr. Gonzalez on the shirts. Who gets this shirt today? This is a new one. Right there's the front.
The casual
Caddyshack.
It is Caddyshack. All right, so now that many of you feel like heathens, so what we did as a group is, he wanted to come in and meet as a group. I'm not going to throw other people under the bus, but it was decided to message him with the link, and I found this guy. I mean, I found the link rather. After he had met with other people and they wanted to have me meet, I went and looked him up. Who's this guy? So I sent the group the link, and they all flipped out. So I said, well, look, why waste my time meeting with them if you're going to be unwilling to work with them anyways? It's a waste of time. I'm in charge of the lab. I have people under me. I have people for this stuff. They bring me in when they need to negotiate a deal. So an email was sent basically with that link saying, hey, is this you? Sorry for the awkward blah, blah, blah. Unfortunately, if this is you, this gives the lab some exposure to liability. We're just not comfortable with that, blah, 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 that stuff. He did write back, saying, yes, it was me, and then went on to like a 4-page explanation of the situation, which is why I know all these individual details. Very forthcoming about it, things like that. But keep in mind that he's been diagnosed with some stuff and goes into court trying to represent himself, and they say no, can't do that. And remember, they've let in some of those sovereign citizen guys. They represent themselves. You heard them. They don't think any of the laws apply to them. Those guys are awesome. Yeah. So anyways, some email was sent saying, take a hike. So I sent an email to him privately, said that I was willing to meet with them, off campus somewhere, and we'll see what happens. But I have a brother who luckily runs his own business, real estate investing business. He spent a little time in federal prison for, the crime was bank fraud, but it was stuff that every real estate investor does, and he got caught. Not that doesn't make it right, but he spent 7 months in federal prison, and if he had to get a normal job, he wouldn't be able to. Because every single place that he has to apply to, he has to hit the checkbox saying, I have a felony. And then that resume goes right in the trash. Nobody will hire him. Luckily, he doesn't require that, but I've seen the flip side of it and realized that, and my brother is 47. So for the rest of his life, he couldn't get a job for time he's already served. Doesn't seem right. Why do we even have prisons then? Just let the public take care of their problems if they're never going to give them a chance again in the future. Brady, you've graced ourselves with your presence. Now, is it diarrhea again? I'll take that silence as a yes. All right, so let's talk about MVP. So last time we've been talking about message passing stuff, things that are built into Unity that are adding some kind of new things to us. Remind me, what's a design pattern? What's a generic design pattern? What are those things? I've forgotten. We've learned about singleton. Singleton is an example of a design pattern. What is a singleton? Yeah, I got nothing. This is just crap. See, this is all just tape time. We're just running here just to hit the checkbox. Oh yeah, we met. we met. All right. So design pattern is a proposed, quote, good solution to a, quote, common problem. Where the idea is to you, what equals a good solution and what equals a common problem. The example I used. Anybody remember the example I used when we first introduced design patterns? Oh my gosh, it's just pathetic. It's really bad. I mean it sincerely. As a group, as a collective, this is this is embarrassing. As a collective, this is embarrassing.
Help us if they read.
Oh, the ones who don't show up, you think they're watching the videos when the ones who usually do show up don't? Okay. The example we used was making a peanut butter and jelly. Every one of us has kind of our well, not every one of us, but there, among this group, there's probably 2 or 3 different approaches to making the perfect peanut butter and jelly. Because you don't want the bread to split when you're, because it rips. So do you toast it to give it a little more integrity? I just glump it all on and I smash them together and go like that. Now you took 15 seconds to make that sandwich. It's going to take another 15 seconds for me to eat it. Why spend a whole lot of time on that construction if we're just going to destroy it in 5 seconds? All right, so that was our example of it. So that means, and I probably also mentioned, I say probably, I'm positive I mentioned that, in academia, for a long time, this became kind of our go-to thing for publications. Because in academia, you have this thing, publish or perish, if you're on a research track somewhere. So you have to write research papers. So now, as a computer scientist or anybody in a field with design patterns, you could just say, okay, I'm going to invent a solution to a common problem. All of us have our way of doing things, right? So you just say, okay, well, this is the way I do this. Fine. So you're going to say, well, I'm going to go ahead and write a paper about the way I do this and why I do it this way. And I'm going to give it a funky name because all design patterns have to have kind of weird names, singleton, stuff like that. So come up with a crazy name. Say it's for a problem that you think you have a solution to, and at the very least, it's a useful problem, at least in your life, so presumably in somebody else's life. You write your paper, you get your publication, check. You met your research requirement. All right, so we talked about singletons. Singletons it's a good idea to keep stuff that needs to be shared among multiple things in a single place. So they all have a way of getting at that data. Basically, the background of cloud computing is that's the whole thing. Before the internet, if you had something on your computer and you needed to share it with others, your option was to get it into software, onto a disk or something and mail it to them, physical mail, physically hand them a floppy disk, which was a lot harder when you had the floppy floppies, the 5 1/4 inch floppies. Which I'm guessing we have laying on here, one of these cabinets, because you had the 3 1/2 inch floppies, the harder one. Well, you never saw those either, except in a museum. But the last floppies we had were those. Well, actually, we had zip drives, and we had jazz drives. So these were our first larger capacity floppies, but you had to have a special kind of cartridge for it. You buy an iOmega zip drive thing for your computer that could accept these bigger, a little bit fatter disks. And then they had a jazz drive too. Jazz drives gave you a gigabyte of storage. A gigabyte of storage back then was ridiculous. It was a lot of storage. How much could be stored on a 3 1/2 inch floppy? The things that we stored everything on for years.
All you need is something.
12 what? Okay. I don't remember anybody ever saying anything about 12. I'm guessing you're referencing when Bill Gates said, is all you'll ever need is 32K of memory. Okay, it's more than 32K. What fits in a 1.44? I actually just gave you the answer. 3 1/2 inch floppy disk held 1.44 megabytes. The floppy disk before that held 768 kilobytes. You'll notice those two very related when it's a power of 2 rounding thing, and a formatting thing. All right, so we have singleton. So now we have this new thing called MVP. So this is another design pattern. MVP stands for Model View Controller. Okay, so we have a model, we have a view, we have a controller. Model view controller says it's a good idea to keep our user interface separate from our data storage, separate from our programming logic. That's what this guy says. Model is our data. So data might be stored in files, a database, cloud, etc., whatever. Your data lives somewhere. Okay, it lives on a hard drive in a file, lives, in a database, maybe running on your computer, maybe running on the cloud, lives somewhere else, but whatever it is, your data is in a place by itself, and you have a mechanism for accessing it. All right, I should finish this. So from our programming logic, and provide a mechanism for communication between these three places. All right, so MVP suggests this. Now, this really came from the early days of the internet. In the early days of the internet, one of the first, you've all been to web pages where you put stuff into text boxes and hit a submit button, right? Well, especially when you're authenticating with something. Let's say you go to Amazon and you put your username and password in. I mean, obviously most of you, it auto logs in, but your username and password have been saved somewhere, or the equivalent of it through security stuff. So you can get in. You're not actually typing it, but you know it's being sent. You're authenticating every single time you open it. Okay, so you open up Amazon. When you type your username and password, is that checking your username and password against some local thing on your computer? Or is that asking the Amazon in the cloud, hey, can I have access to all your junk I can buy? You're authenticating with something that is outside of you. Now, so you type in your username and password, hit submit. Those two pieces of information leave your computer over the internet and go somewhere. Who catches that? What is processing your username and password on the back end? What kind of thing? Is it a database? Is it a computer program? I'll pause really long on that one. There's a computer program running in the sky somewhere, running on a server somewhere else. That's probably in a building somewhere. And we just say cloud because it's beyond us. It's outside of us. Okay, so there's a computer program that is running on a computer somewhere that ultimately our username and password get to. It might go through a couple of other train stations before it gets there, but ultimately our username and password land as inputs to a function in a computer program that takes a username and password as inputs and goes and does whatever it means to authenticate that user for, in this example, Amazon, right? It goes and hits their database and encrypts everything, blah, 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 does their stuff, and ultimately returns with a yes or no. Maybe a little, here's the user's information, here's their name, stuff like that. So you can put it at the top of every page. Amazon always says, "Hi, Mike," at the top of your page. And if it says, "Hi, Tabby," I know I'm accidentally logged in as my wife. Ultimately, when we hit submit on that website, it's going to a computer program somewhere to process it. And we've written computer programs. We've written functions that take multiple inputs and process those inputs and then return a value. It's going to the same type of thing. Go ahead.
So I know we didn't, but word authentication or something like that, does that tie into how username and password is verified?
Well, it depends on the technology you're using, because authentication token is kind of a generic term. Usually when you have tokens, it's when you've pre-authenticated with something and they've now handed you a credential that you can use, almost like a fast pass. You know, when you go to your you know, to lunch, you tap your card, it's sending something, you know, instead of you telling them who your name is and what your, you know, phone number is or whatever for them to look you up in the cafeteria and take points off you or whatever. It's happening, you know, you are providing input to a computer program. Okay, because you're reading it, you know, the card reader's reading something from your card. Could be a security, it actually sort of is a security token. It's not your phone number that comes off there. It's a unique number that comes off there that is then used to look you up somewhere else.
API.
Well, similar to an API key. It's a unique token. I mean, you can just go back further. If you know, when you you know, when you were a kid, you went into a place that maybe you got you know, a place came with a free lunch or something like that. So you went to some event, and when you went in, they hand you a little card or something like that, and say, just hand this to the people when to get your lunch. This is your voucher for the lunch. Same thing. When we say an API key, it's your voucher that says I am allowed. Somebody has given me the authority to do what I'm about to do. However, you got that. Okay. And then you have some people who you give an API key to who burn through all your tokens from I've never seen you hit the limit on a single computer program for your number of tokens in a day. But Logan did it.
What did I do?
He messaged me and says the Gemini key is out of quota. But it's not actually out of quota. The error is the number of requests you can make in a day off an API key on a paid tier. So the only way to increase that thing is to move to the next tier. And to get to the next tier, we have to earn our way to that tier by spending enough money with them. You can't just like turn it on. You know, it's like, so what I had to do, I had to go learn about,
Yeah, I'm doing a lot of testing.
I had to learn about how their process works. I can't just give another API key within the same project because all of them share the same quota. So if you had 5 people working on a single project and you're giving each one their own API key so you can kind of measure the amount of communication the individual developers are doing, right? You would give them each their own unique API key, but it would be within the same project. So they're sharing that same quota, but you can see who participated in what way. Yeah, there's only one person in this project, and that's Logan. So he runs out of quota. So I had to create a second project, just the same name of that project with the number 2 after it, and give him an API key from that one so that he had a backup key for when he runs out of juice on his first key. You got the key, right? The second key.
I'll drain that one dry too.
I know. All right. So anyways, in the early days of the internet, you go to a web page, you type some stuff in, because you know the very, very, very early days of the internet, when web pages first started being a thing, you know, the web pages were just very much a visual thing. You know, you went there was a couple of pictures on the screen and information. It was not this dynamic experience. It wasn't your doorway into a computer program somewhere else. All right. Now, web pages, what kind of information, if you were to look at the source code for a web page, what kinds of things would you find in that source code? If you go to any website and you right click on it. Yeah, here, we're on Unity's website here. We're going to say, oh, I got to click on something that isn't view page source. So you get something that looks like this. All right. So every single web page has what kind of stuff in it? This is kind of actually a bad example, but it still fits the answer. Go ahead. HTML, CSS, and what else? JavaScript. Why JavaScript? Why not just stop at HTML? HTML is not a programming language. Why? Why is HTML not a programming language? What's the definition of a programming language? All programming languages have facilities for what three things? Asking questions, repetition.
Isn't it like logic or like?
What are you asking me for? I'm asking you. I have forgotten. Memory. Okay. We all, when we solve problems, we remember stuff, we ask questions, we do things like repetition through loops and functions, things like that. This is the way human beings solve problems. Computer programs, programming languages give us mechanisms to allow us to try to solve problems in a very similar way to how we already solve problems, even though we do have to change our thinking because now we're talking to something like a computer that requires more detail in order to accomplish its tasks. All right. So when you go into a web page, you could say, well, sometimes we need to do some programming type stuff on a web page. Make sure they put in all the stuff in a web form. Web form's asking for your first name, last name, and phone number, and it puts those little red stars next to it. Says these are required. You know, if you don't put them in and you hit submit, chances are it's going to yell at you right away, right? Because you didn't fill in the whole form. It's going to say you're missing stuff. You're missing stuff from this form. Do you think when you did that, it sent your entire form with all of its contents out with all of its lack of contents? Things that were required to accomplish this task. Do you think it took all that stuff, including your blanks, sent it across the internet to a server somewhere, only for it to get rejected because you didn't send enough stuff? Or do you think that initial validation is happening locally on your computer? Make sure you fill in the right crap before you send your form in for processing. This is not a new thing, right? You know, if you're renewing your driver's license, you got the form to fill out, and you show up to the front of the line at the DMV and it's got 2/3 of it not filled out. What do? Do they sit there and nicely help you fill it out? No, they yell at you belligerently, tell you to go and finish figuring out and take a new number. We'll call you in an hour and a half. That's what they do. Even if you're missing one little thing, they don't let you fix it there. All right, so we have had the same stuff in real life, right? Somebody validates our thing. We walk up to the DMV person, they are validating our paperwork. Then they get you in the system once they validated it, and they send go take your picture with the person down there. Right? But they get you into the computer system. They finally send it on for processing once they validated that you had everything that is required to get the job done. Okay, this isn't new stuff for us, right? This is how humans have operated for a long time. It's not a surprise that when humans started solving problems with computers, that they said, okay, well, we're solving the same problems we used to solve. We're just solving them faster and in a more automated way, right? We're taking a lot of the grunt work out, but we still have the same kind of stuff we're dealing with. You know, you have to give me your permission, you know, proof that you're allowed to go in where you're going in here. You know, like I'm guessing that the person we talked about earlier, out of an abundance of caution, may not be allowed into elementary schools and stuff like that, you know, just because of an abundance of caution. You know, where I'd be willing to bring him into my 8 a.m. class, just see what happens. This is a test. How many of you stay in the room to hear this guy out versus how many of you grab your backpacks? It's just, no way. You lock us in behind the swipe, start piling stuff up behind the thing. We're right above the loading dock here. It's actually, you know.
But if anything foolish happened, which I doubt it would, I would be the permit.
With this group, you're thinking nothing foolish might happen with this group. I mean, it doesn't have to be something at that extreme. He definitely gets it. All right. So all of our web pages have HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in it. JavaScript is our programming language for doing computer programming stuff, processing stuff. HTML is the thing that shows our pretty user interface, right? And what does CSS do? CSS is actually newer than all of them. So in the beginning, there was HTML and JavaScript. There was actually a competitor with JavaScript in the beginning. Anybody know who the competitor was? A couple of you were around in the beginning. How many of you were at some sort of mental age in 1994? A couple people were alive then, right? You weren't alive. No. You were 98? And how old was I? I was in 94. Yeah, I was almost 20. 90. So I was well, not quite 20, I guess. I was born in 78. But in the early days of the internet, we definitely had HTML. We did not have CSS. And I would say JavaScript was always kind of the popular one, but there was an alternative one that came from Microsoft called VB Script. Do you know what the VB stands for?
Virtual.
I'll tell you, the V stands for visual. What does the B stand for? Visual Basic. What was Basic? When we say basic, what was Basic? Basic was a programming language that predated graphic user interfaces. So in your early DOS computers that only ran DOS, there was a programming language built into it called Quick Basic. Well, Basic was the language. Microsoft had an editor built into early DOS called Quick Basic. At the command line, you didn't have buttons to click on and stuff like that. At the command line, you would type in, edit, because that was your Microsoft Word back then, or their text editor was called edit. So you type edit space my program dot, you can name it whatever you want, but let's say .qb for Quick Basic. So it would open up an empty text editor. You would then type in your code following the basic syntax, the syntax of the basic programming language, where we're doing the C# programming language here. We were doing the Java programming language before. We were doing the Python programming language before that, but we're still doing computer programming stuff. So you do all your code in there, you'd save it, exit out, then you'd have to run it with the basic commands. So depending on your lineage of DOS, let's just say you type in basic space myprogram.qb, and it would run your program or yell at you if there was a problem, whatever. So that's where basic came from. And it was a Microsoft thing. They probably stole it or bought it off someone. I don't know the whole backstory to basic, but they bought Windows later on, so it was already in their DNA. Well, actually, no, they bought DOS rather early on, so it was already in their DNA for acquiring things through ways that were not them doing it, but them buying it. Save some time. That was our, VB Script was Microsoft repackaging their old basic thing, which had kind of already fallen out of favor. People weren't all that interested anymore. Now people using programs were doing more C, C++. Pascal used to be a programming language. How many of you have heard of Pascal? Heard of Pascal? What can you tell me about Pascal? Pascal was a programming language developed for teaching, for the classroom. So imagine if you came to college and we didn't have you working with the actual tools you would be using in industry. Instead, you were working with a language like Pascal that was not used in industry at the time to teach you how to program, because it was built with, it hid the stuff that was kind of unimportant, but showed you everything that was more important. So you had the pointers, you had all the stuff that some of these newer languages hide from you, but you were learning Pascal. My first programming language that I took in college was Pascal. I had programmed before that, but my first language I took in college was Pascal. So you had a whole bunch of people who knew Pascal going out into industry where none of them used Pascal. but Pascal was very based on C. So not really a major issue, but very based on C. But what ended up happening is people came out of college with a competency in Pascal, and even though, like I teach, programming is a skill set, the language doesn't matter, a lot of them were still comfortable with Pascal and would have been happy if there was Pascal in the real world. So even though Pascal was originally written as a teaching language, it made its way out into the real world and was hidden inside of another product. Anybody know what that product was called? Nobody could tell me what Pascal was. So I'm guessing no. There was a product called Delphi. Anybody hear of a program called Delphi? So Delphi was a program that was kind of like a built-in database thing with a programming language built into it, which was Pascal. Then years later, Pascal was you still had the people screaming about Pascal. And this was during the period of time leading up to the Java lawsuit from Microsoft. So Microsoft still has a product called Visual Studio. What's Visual Studio? Okay, it's an IDE, and does it just have one language in it? So Visual Studio is an IDE that gives you a consistent user interface for writing code, but allows you to write in multiple languages. Kind of sounds like VS Code.
Yeah.
Way before VS Code was VS Code, right? But it gave you things for building user interfaces as well. But in any case, so Visual Studio back then had Visual C++, it had Visual Basic. Visual Basic was one of the popular programming languages used by places to create kind of simple graphic user interface applications. And it could be done by someone with not a strong computer programming background, more of the hunt and peck, copy stuff in type thing. It just was kind of simpler for making things work, but it also took, it gave you a lot of leeway. Like you could typecast something into an ice cream cone and it would just ignore it rather than giving you an error. Like, I'm sure you didn't mean ice cream cone, so I'm just going to move on. It was like, I'm not even kidding about that. So anyways, we had Visual Basic in there. You also had J++. That was Java syntax. Now, later on, you also had J#, but we had F# at some point. Have you ever heard the programming language called F#? So one of the releases of Visual Studio had F# in it. It's pronounced Delphi, and by that I mean it's pronounced Pascal. That's what F# was. It's the Pascal programming language. Then they dropped it because nobody was using that anymore, as other programming languages raised up, and as all of years and years and years had passed at this point by the time that came out, where more languages than Pascal were being taught in colleges. So it wasn't really a popular language even when it came out day one. It was kind of something they just threw in there because they already had the back end for it in another one of their products. Same thing we see from Excel, right? Excel has had zillions and zillions of bolt-ons over the years, where if you're a high-power spreadsheet person, the only tool for the job is Excel. If you're a normal human who uses spreadsheets, there's a zillion tools that you can use, open source ones, blah, 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 to do what most people need for spreadsheets. Go ahead. Substantial differences. Visual Studio is a editor with a built-in graphic user interface editor. So it gives you, this is back connected to MVC, Model View Controller. So MVC says it's a good idea to separate your data from your user interface from your code, your logic. So what did Visual Studio do? Visual Studio gave you an interface for building your GUI, your user interface. It gave you a text editor for writing your code. Modern versions of Visual Studio give you a mechanism for connecting to, older versions let you connect to a local or a remote SQL server. How many of you have heard of SQL Server? How many of you have heard of MySQL? How many have heard of PostgreSQL? Kind of interesting. MySQL was super popular for a long time. PostgreSQL was always there, but nobody really cared about it. And it was one of those things where people knew it kind of was like a more powerful database, kind of closer to the big boys you pay a lot of money for, Oracle and SQL Server. Microsoft, or sorry, IBM also had a really famous database, a relational database from years ago called DB2. Yes, yeah, they had really interesting, like in names that were, you can tell they spent a whole lot of time on. Like, okay, we're writing a database, we're just going to call it DB. Second version, it's DB2. Yeah, they just kept doing that stuff. So anyways, the early versions of Visual Studio let you connect to SQL Server, which was Microsoft's industry level SQL Server relational database. Its main competitor was Oracle, with DB2 being a lesser competitor, mostly because it still had an install base. DB2 was a very, very popular database until it just kind of got replaced by places. So they had to finally do that. But Microsoft SQL Server you paid for that. It was expensive. So you had these free tools like MySQL and PostgreSQL Server that allowed you to do most of that, even for large-ish size companies, but not like Amazon, Google level stuff. If you were dealing with a number of database queries that are happening per second on sites like Google and Amazon and things like that, this isn't like something that like 12 people at the same time might be using. You need a big boy database that can handle concurrent connections, make sure your database, your data doesn't get destroyed. We talked about race conditions when we introduced threads. You had to make sure that, two different things were trying to write to the same table at the same time, and one didn't write something and the other one immediately overwrote it. So it had a lot of protections for multiple users using it. And that's what companies were paying for. But if you were a normal person writing something for a medium or small size business, you could get away with free tools, no problem. How many of you have heard of SQLite? SQLite is something that's built into a lot of projects. It's probably something you really, really, really want to get to know. I'm going to kind of be talking about that as we go through this here. SQLite is what's called a relational database. You'll learn all about that when you take the database class. How many of you have heard of MongoDB? Oh, you've heard of that. We got a bunch of hands. Yeah. Okay, what's MongoDB? Hands drop. Super quick. These are things that came out during your lifetime. We no longer talking about 1994. We're talking like 2020? Maybe 2018? I'm trying to think, did it predate COVID? But every one of you was alive when Mongo, and adults-ish. I mean, so far as some of you are adults now. So MongoDB, what's different about MongoDB versus MySQL, PostgreSQL? What does the DB stand for in MongoDB? Yeah, see, I just wanted to throw you a softball just to make sure. Yeah, just to make sure you're, go ahead.
I think you remember that because I think you talked about it in coding one.
Probably did.
I just don't remember where exactly that Lego.
Okay, well, so we're gonna give that a +1 because at least what he said was, I think you've talked about this before. Where the other thing was things I definitely did talk about before, but it was just deer in the headlight type situation. And it was like, okay, I think we talked about that. In the early days, well, here, I'll actually give you a hint. We would have talked about this when we were talking about the memory used to be very, very expensive and we didn't have a whole lot of it. Or now memory's dirt cheap and you're only paying a premium for memory when you start getting into super, super, super high amounts of RAM configurations that they have to do some special stuff to make work. You know, like for if you go out and buy a new Mac as an example, because Apple historically, you know, they charge a lot for RAM. But if you look at Apple, you can configure a MacBook Pro up to 64 gigabytes of RAM. Actually, 48 is probably the real price cutoff, but 64 gigabytes of RAM costs X. When you jump to 128 gigabytes of RAM, that cost is significantly more cost per gigabyte than you paid going up to 64, because the chips, the processors themselves, have to support the larger memory bank. If you go on to the Apple Store to buy a Mac, and you can do the same thing on other things. I'm just using Apple as a as the example here, but mostly because they have a much newer architecture. You could think of Intel today as being like Microsoft, where you can think of Apple today being like the new kid. Even though Apple's been around for a long time, they've gone through some changes that we talked about in the past, right? Apple used to be running PowerPC processors made by IBM. That was back when they were running an older operating system, OS 8, OS 9, OS 7, OS 6 was still running on PowerPCs. Then, do we remember the Steve Jobs story where Steve Jobs was fired from Apple? Okay, you got that one. All right. So he was fired from Apple, right? And during that time is when they started making some changes with Apple. They let other people make hardware. They let other people make hardware for Apple computers rather than Apple controlling the hardware and the software, which was Apple's claim to fame, is their proprietariness. People hate them for it, but it's why Apple is popular, is because their stuff just works. And for the average consumer, that's a benefit. But for the average like geek type personality, you prefer Android because Android gives you a lot more control over your operating system, gives you more ways of getting into stuff and messing with stuff. But effectively, what are you doing? You're taking on the onus of saying, okay, I might break something, you know, and this thing becomes unstable and things like that, but you at least can tinker with it quite a bit. You can sort of tinker with iPhones and stuff with jailbreaking it, but you're never going to get the level of access you have on Android side. Android has a clean Linux backbone. Once you root an Android device, you're running Linux on an Android device, and you can just do whatever you want. So that's why it's popular among geeks. It's not that it's crappy. You just have two different product lines. So Android is like Microsoft. You know, they're solving the problem where they're writing the operating system, Android, to run on a zillion different devices. And they make it open source so that they don't have to solve the entire problem of getting it to run on different devices, right? So when you buy a Samsung Galaxy, it's running Android, but it's running a Samsunged up version of Android, right? They've done some stuff to it. It's not vanilla Android. If you want to get vanilla Android today, what phone do you get? Pixel. So Google Pixel is effectively what they write Android for. They write Android for the Google Pixel. But because it's an open source operating system, other people can do whatever they want with it. There's this one company out there now that I think is anti-Google. So what they've done is they have a version of Android that just stripped all of Google out of. I mean, that's a bold move. Android, those are veins they're pulling out of that operating system to de-Google Android. That's rough. So I think that you're probably having some significant problems with that. But in any case, Android solving the old Microsoft system where they're writing software to run on a zillion computers. Apple solving the old Apple problem where they're writing software that runs on exactly their hardware. Pick your version of iPhone, and what do? Well, after we're about 3 versions back, we stopped supporting it. Why? Well, because we want you to buy a new iPhone. And then they get accused of what, like backloading older versions, so it becomes heavier and heavier on the older hardware, and you update it thinking you're getting the late. Oh man, it still supports my phone. You put it in, your battery life goes to 8 minutes. So Safari takes a week to load. Nothing's there. So what are you doing? You're out the store hoping that your phone carrier has a deal on at least last year's iPhone. All right. So related to databases, so Microsoft had SQL Server, which was their commercial thing. Visual Studio let you connect to that. Visual Studio Code is strictly a text editor. It's a text editor that is made for programmers, but you can use it for non-programming stuff. They have all sorts of stuff for like Markdown and stuff like that. So it doesn't have to be just coding stuff. It's a text editor, but it's geared towards programmers for a lot of their plugins. So it has Python built into it, which is not a Microsoft technology. And it's not that Python's built into it. It's they have a module that knows how to speak Python. And if you don't have Python on your computer, it'll install Python on your computer, which is not a Microsoft product. It's, hey, do you want Python? Because if you want to write Python in here and press the little play button, we got to install Python. But they hide a lot of that stuff from you. So Visual Studio Code is I would suggest it's probably become the de facto standard on, at the very least, on Windows machines and Macs for just people who code in different languages. They do have a version for Linux. Is it the de facto, Logan, is it the de facto editor for Linux, or are you using something Godot related, like the equivalent of Godot for an IDE? What stupid IDE do you use for text editing on Linux? Are you using VS Code?
Yeah.
Okay, so VS Code's the popular one on Linux as well.
It's also VS Codium.
Open source VS Code.
Yeah.
Which one do you use?
VS Code.
Just a traitor.
Well,
You're an embarrassment to Linux.
well, no, VS Codium, you can't install like.
I don't want to hear your excuses. All I'm saying is you're running Linux because you're pushing against the man. And you're running Microsoft software on Linux.
You can't install like proper extensions on a VS Codium and proprietary for VS Code. To say, oh, VS Code is open source, you can only use it and use our proprietary version of it.
A real Linux user would write their own version of VS Code instead of use VS Code themselves.
My bad, I should do that. I'm gonna use up all your cloud credits.
I'm just saying it's an embarrassment. As computer programmers, we should write our own tools for being power users on our own machines, right?
Yep.
That's what you want to get to, and you're using Microsoft crap on Linux?
Yeah, you're right.
It's just a sellout.
Yep.
I should write my own. I should write my own.
Well, write your own canvas doesn't make any sense because it's not you who's picking canvas, it's the university who's picking canvas. So if you want to be able to submit, now, having said that, Canvas does have API access. So you could write your own canvas, have everything submitted to real Canvas from that, but you can build your own interface. Because I do all my grading that way. I don't grade within Canvas. I grade in an external piece of software that integrates some AI stuff and things like that for summarizing documents. But I write it myself because Canvas's user interface is junk. If you guys saw what I get on the back end of your assignments, you're getting, hey, here's encouraging language, here's a nice high score, okay? But if you came to me and said, hey, I want to know, I really struggled on that assignment and, I still got a full score or whatever. If you come to me, I can instantly bring up your actual score. So on my screen, I get two different things. I get an actual report and I have an actual assessment of how you actually did on the assignment. And what you would have gotten if we were grading this for, real. And then you get your grade based on the effort, the time you put into this, because the exams are where I want to find out those things. So if you are interested in how bad you were at something, you can certainly email me. I can just take a screenshot of the real assessment on the thing. It'll show both scores. It'll show what was released to Canvas, and it'll show you what I should have released to Canvas. Trust me when I say I look at all your stuff. I get it prepared for me in a, it's kind of like somebody cooks a bunch of food in a fancy restaurant, then brings it out on a nice convenient plate.
the media plate as like a great way.
And I have an agent that every single day at 8 a.m. sends me a text and tells me about all the students in all my classes that are struggling. Who has missed the last 3 assignments? Who is getting high scores on their papers, but bombing the quizzes? So I get reports every single day. So I'm not out of touch where, because I'm teaching a lot of classes at the same time. I'm not out of touch for some grad student who sometimes it's out of sight, out of mind if it's an online class. I'm not out of touch with, hey, this guy is bombing quizzes and he's turning in every assignment and getting good grades. There's something that's disconnected there. Or this person hasn't participated in the class in a month. I get that as well. And I mean, yeah, there's some people in classes that you are in, including this one, who get some emails from me related to the reports I get daily. But this is using technology to enhance stuff. So anyways, Android solving the Microsoft problem, Apple solving the old Apple problem. Steve Jobs gets fired from Apple. Apple goes unproprietary, almost fails as a company. They then reabsorb, Steve Jobs goes and finds, creates Next Computers outside of Apple. Apple acquires Next Computers for $1. Steve Jobs comes back in as the interim CEO. Comes out with iPhone, iPad, iBook, which is that was a laptop that was like multicolored, it had a handle. They were really cool. Clamshell things. If you look up iBook online, you'll see some a pretty cool thing. But they came out with all that stuff. His interim CEO became iCEO, permanent CEO, and Steve Jobs replaced Apple with Next Computers, so Apple died. And they became proprietary again. Now, you also see these same things happen. How many times has Apple tried to come out with their own version of something to compete with someone else and it just doesn't work? So, for instance, Apple in the early days of these AI things was trying to make their own AIs. And they finally gave up on it and said, at least they gave up for now. If we fast forward 10 years, sometimes Apple's late to the game, but they do stuff maybe better than others or something, but my spidey senses don't say this is the case. Apple tried to compete with the other companies that were being very successful with their AI models and couldn't. So what did they do? They made a deal with OpenAI to get ChatGPT incorporated into their stuff. I think that deal is dying and Apple's actually jumping over to Google as their back-end AI. Is my last understanding. Who knows where these deals are this week? But so won't that be interesting? That Apple, your iPhone, will have embedded in it. So you'll have Siri powered by Google Gemini, which is the AI that their closest competitor, Android, closest competitor, their legit competitor. Android and iOS are legitimate Rocky Balboa versus Ivan Drago fighting. Both of them are solid. So it's not like Android's the weak second kid anymore. Early days, first 5-7 years, Android was grasping at some straws, but they stole enough stuff from iPhone that they caught up, but still stayed, hey, they're not the big bad wolf Apple, and we can mess with this as geeks and stuff like that. So Android found their footing. Their footing was the anti-Apple people plus the anti-Apple people who were not technology people, but just were anti-Apple. And then you had the technology people who maybe weren't necessarily anti-Apple, but they wanted to be able to have access to the technology they were paying for. Like, okay, I'm getting a phone, which is hardware, plus I'm getting the operating system, which is software. We can maybe tolerate the software being a little bit locked down, but if you can't access the hardware that you're paying for, that's a no-go for a lot of tech geeks, especially younger. Like I would have been an Android user when I was your age. When you get older and you just want stuff to work and you're done with tinkering with little stuff and now you're working with, making your own things and stuff like that, your perspective changes on stuff. But That's the punchline. So just quickly to finish up this slide, even though we're still working on this backstory, Model View Controller says that rather than letting your application get too scary by shoving everything into a single code base, a single file where you have inside here, you have all your database stuff, you have all your syntax stuff, you have all your user interface stuff, and this looks like just spaghetti code. Rather than that, we're going to split it out and say your code's going to go here. That's going to be the brains behind the operation. Your interface is going to go here. That's your view. This is going to be how pretty your application looks. And then you're going to have your database. Where am I storing the data that I need to remember between runs of my application? Might be MySQL, might be just a file on your computer, but that's in a different place as well. Separate those things. So when you need to change your user interface, you fix that. When you need to change the brains behind the operation, you change this. It pulls the mess apart. All right, that's what MVC solves. All right, questions, comments, concerns, bribes. Front row at Chapel, you're all invited. I will see everybody on Thursday. What's up?